The United Nations Charter is the most important secular document in the world. This is a treaty that arose after World War II in 1945, to which almost all countries in the world are party to. In other words, they have signed up, they become member states of the United Nations by signing up to the UN Charter, and they become subject to the provisions, principles, and duties and rights relating to human rights and fundamental freedoms, relating to international law, relating to international peace and security, relating to economic and social progress in the world, and relating to peacemaking. How do you make peace when there's a conflict that arises? All of that is in the UN Charter. Those are guidelines. And they're also guardrails against what states should not be doing. Namely, there's a prohibition on the use of armed force to settle disputes. Very, very basic. There's a provision on don't interfere with the strictly internal affairs of states. There's another provision that says you have the right of inherent individual or collective self-defense, the right of self-defense. It is a guideline for how countries should conduct themselves in the world. Now, the UN Charter was negotiated and then finalized in 1945. That's a long time ago. And since then, some of the challenges facing the world were not really on the map in 1945. Climate change, energy issues, water shortages, mass refugee flows, not individual refugees, but mass refugee flows. And also kind of the reemergence of aggressive war. Another big one is artificial intelligence. The whole cyber world was not even imagined in 1945. Those are just huge challenges. And we call those sometimes existential challenges, namely our very survival is at stake with these challenges. They go to the very heart of, is the human race going to survive? Is planet Earth going to survive environmentally? We're at that stage now. So it's very important to look at the UN Charter as one of the tools we can use to actually confront these existential challenges. There are quite a number of ways that the UN Charter could be reinterpreted or freshly interpreted in order to be relevant in our modern lives. First of all, on human rights and fundamental freedoms, we need to understand the UN Charter as not only seeking to protect individual rights, but also being very cognizant of collective rights of peoples, particularly indigenous groups. These are groups of people who, as a group, deserve the protection of the human rights of the group itself, the collective body of the group. And we need to read the UN Charter as embracing that, as well as what it always has since 1945, which is the protection of individual human rights. Secondly, let's just take international law as an example. It would be very useful if there was a greater use by states of the International Court of Justice, which is the UN's court, in order to bring disputes to that court for adjudication by judges, as well as to have some body within the United Nations that every year would monitor and inform the world of how states are actually complying with the UN Charter or violating the UN Charter. Third, with international peace and security, what constitutes the use of force has dramatically leaped since 1945, particularly in terms of technology, of the cyber world, of how various attacks can be constructed without even using the conventional armed forces. You can endanger the security of other countries. And the UN Charter needs to recognize the diversity of threats that now exist in the world, and that the United Nations needs to be on top of addressing. And then finally, peacemaking. And this is where there's such a shortage in what emerges from the UN Charter but is not acted upon by the United Nations and by states, which is there are ways to interpret the UN Charter whereby the UN can be, frankly, far more effective to intervene diplomatically in order to preempt the commission of atrocities and of conflicts, and frankly also to deal with resolving conflicts once they began. That power that particularly is held by the Secretary General of the United Nations can be a very effective power to wield. This one individual who heads up the entire UN system can walk into the Security Council and say, you pay attention to this conflict, you do something about this conflict. And so the Secretary General has that power. And I think one thing that could be more common in the future is for the Secretary General to actually exercise that power more frequently, to really perk up the Security Council and insist that it deal with particular situations. But it takes guts to do it. The bottom line of the UN Charter is that it presents the opportunity for humankind to survive all of the challenges that existed not only in 1945 when the UN Charter was created, but so many decades later when so many existential challenges confront humankind. There has to be a coordinating mechanism, a means by which countries can come together and help solve those problems. And if they don't solve them, at least talk the heck out of them with each other. And that the United Nations offers that forum to address those critical challenges to humankind.